We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us, talking about insanity pleas, what it takes to get deemed competent to stand trial. Dr. Kimberly Brown's with us from Vanderbilt, forensic psychologist. Really good to have her on. This has been a great show. We've got a few calls for you through the break. Let's take those real quick, Doctor. We've got Brian. Brian, good morning. Hi, Brian. What's your question?
Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Oh, I almost forgot what I was going to say.
I'm sorry.
I've been on hold for a while. I wanted to know from the doc, does she think that Travis was medicated during the trial? I mean, he had this stupid look on his face the whole time that they were running through it. Did they have him medicated? Well, I mean, I just want to ask her that.
I don't know if you can answer that or not, but...
What I can tell you in general is that for people with serious mental illness who are incompetent initially because of their psychosis, typically the way that they become competent is with medication, and then they stay on that medication throughout the course of their trial so that they can remain competent.
Okay, so, and it is a combination then of medication, and is it counseling that they get as well, or what couples with the medication to help them get back to the state where they're more normal?
Sure. I mean, therapy can be helpful with the symptoms, but most of the time in the criminal justice system, the main source of treatment is medication. But there usually aren't the resources to provide psychotherapy in the jail setting. So most of the time, if the reason that they're incompetent is due to psychosis, it is medication, it is antipsychotic medication that is treating them, that is then making them competent to stand trial.
Okay. Well, I'm just curious. I mean, I may not or may recognize some. What are some of the drugs used to treat schizophrenia or some of these types of illnesses, mental illnesses?
So there are some older medications that we still use, medications like Haldol, which many people will probably recognize. There are medications that are a little bit newer that are more what's called atypical antipsychotics, and these are things like Zyprexa, Geodon, Seroquel, Risperdal, Abilify.
Gotcha. Okay, I was just curious. I've heard of some of those, and I know there's some new ones out there. Let's take a call from Ed. Ed, good morning. Hi, Ed.
Hey, hello, people. I'm curious about insanity. Is somebody born insane? Are they insane when they're 1 year old? How do you tell? Or does something infect their brain, a bacteria or something like that?
Okay, you want to give them a primer on that?
Yeah, so if we're talking about insanity, we're only talking about their state of mind at the time of the crime. Again, because it's a legal term that refers to whether they could appreciate basically the nature or wrongfulness of their actions. So insanity just means what their mental state was at the time of the crime. Now, if you're talking about mental illness in general, how do people get mental illness? It usually is a combination of the environment and genetics. So some people are born with a genetic predisposition to acquire a mental illness. And then there are certain things in the environment that contribute to the development of that mental illness. So what we know is that even though people may be born, for example, with the genetic predisposition towards schizophrenia, this disorder doesn't tend to have an onset until late teens, early 20s. So you wouldn't see the signs of it until that point in the most of the time, as opposed to disorders like an intellectual disability, which people are typically born with. You see the signs very early on in development. So it depends on the mental illness, but pretty much almost all the disorders that we have are some combination of genes and environment.
I want to go back as we kind of wrap things up, going to the competency issue. You talked about two of the factors sometimes that can't be overcome with treatment potentially, and that would be if someone's suffering from like a dementia or an Alzheimer's. You said also someone who has maybe, did you say a learning disability or something along those lines?
An intellectual disability. This used to be called mental retardation.
Okay, something along those lines. What about, could you have potentially some kind of, through a series of like PTSD experiences, maybe coupling with, extreme drug abuse and maybe have a psychic break of sorts where you just completely lose touch of reality and can't come back to the real world?
Most of the time you can come back to the real world. So those disorders, PTSD, breaks with reality, those conditions are treatable, and most people can rebound and are very resilient. So we do have treatments that are effective for that. In terms of the drug use, we do sometimes see, of course, people tend to do better when they're off of the drugs and can kind of regain their functioning, their abilities. We do sometimes see people who have used substances for so long, though, that there is some deterioration that happens in their cognitive abilities such that they develop a condition that's similar to a dementia. And so, long-term chronic substance abuse can lead toward a permanent condition that may be difficult to recover from.
I think you've done a fantastic job just in this hour with us of educating folks about it. In general, do you think people are gaining a better understanding, perhaps, of mental illness? You made the point, too, about how in the prisons there's not means for therapy. You know, Davidson County Sheriff Darren Hall has this new jail, and part of the facility there has a mental health treatment facility for him, for some of these inmates that come in that aren't, suffering so much from drugs, but need mental health help. Do you think people are getting a better understanding in general, the public, just your observations from where you sit, of mental illness, or is there still a lot of misconceptions?
I think there's still a lot of misconceptions. I think you could see this pretty easily at the Travis Reinking trial, where there was sort of at times suggested that you could look at somebody and know whether they were mentally ill or not, or know the degree of symptoms that they were having. I think there's some real misconceptions about once you have a mental illness, everything you do has to be mentally ill, so to say, that you can't do anything that's sort of normal. And so there's a real misconception about how mental illness impacts people. I do want to say that Sheriff Darren Hall, I think, is one of the more enlightened individuals about mental illness. He really has been just very inspirational in the way that he has viewed mental illness in the criminal justice system. And the part of the jail, the behavioral care center that he has established is really state of the art and important in treating individuals with mental illness in the criminal justice system. But it only captures a very small percentage of people who are in the system, because most of them have misdemeanor charges or low-level felony charges. They make some exceptions for, but people who have more serious charges or who are more unstable are not able to be in that behavioral care center. But I just want to give a shout out to Sheriff Darren Hall for all the work he's done. I
echo exactly what you just said. And I guess it is important to remind folks, too, I tried to repeat this during our gavel-to-gavel coverage, that there are a lot of people that suffer from mental illness in life, depression or otherwise. It's treatable, they're functioning, there's nothing wrong with them in terms of whether or not they are more prone toward violence. And most schizophrenics are not violent, right?
That's absolutely right. In fact, they're more likely to be victims of violence, and they're more likely to harm themselves. So suicide is really a much serious condition that has a higher base rate than homicide when you're looking at in general, but also with people with mental illness. And Nick, I think that's a great point. There still is a lot of stigma attached to mental illness. And listen, all of us know or have experienced symptoms of mental illness, or have people close to us who have had symptoms of mental illness. And these are conditions that are treatable. We should be encouraging people to get treatment. We shouldn't be looking at it as sort of a black mark on your record if you go and get treatment for mental illness. We can help people, and we want people to feel better and to function better in life, so that they can be happy and meet their goals and get the most that they want out of life. Yeah, really, the one key too is, as you've said, as you go back in the past on a lot of these cases, and I've done this on some of these, but whether we're talking about the case out of Sumner County or Travis Reinking, there were just all kinds of flags leading up to this, in my opinion, meaning had treatment been made available to any of these individuals at one point, and maybe they didn't want to take it, some of this could have been avoided, and that's a concern for me, because it just didn't happen out of the blue. It rarely does. I mean, how often have you seen cases where there's just someone who commits one of these crimes and it's like, well, they have no history of it, but here they're saying they're incompetent? There's been a pattern from early on, isn't there? Absolutely. The red flags are there. And I can't tell you how many times I have heard family members tell me, we tried to get him help. We knew something was wrong. We knew that he needed help, but we couldn't figure out how to do it, or no one would listen to us, or The police came and took him to jail instead, and we couldn't get him the help he needed. If we could only have gotten him the help he needed, this would have never happened. I've heard that many times, and it's really difficult to navigate the mental health system in our country. And it's really difficult to get people help and treatment who don't want that treatment.
Yeah, and that's part of it.
There's a real emphasis on the real emphasis on individuality and independence of decision making.
Yeah, because, I mean, I don't know the situation with Travis Reinking necessarily, except that he was an adult. And, if he chooses not to, you can't lock him up before he's committed any crime. And if he doesn't seek the help that he needs. But boy, there were plenty of red flags there, from the White House to some of the things he did, back in Illinois. And then beyond that. And you think, gosh, could these lives have been saved had they paid more attention to it? Well, Dr. Brown, listen, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Just fascinating to hear from you, and I really appreciate you sharing some of your insight today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, take care, and hopefully maybe we'll talk again down the road. But thank you again, and we'll see you
I would love that.
down the road. Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with a programming note about tomorrow right after this. Stay with us.